Hello there. I hope you're doing well. Trying to get back in the habit of doing this once a week while I'm able. Still on that crazy job market. But I figure, hey, right now while I'm looking for right livelihood, I can do this. And I'm so grateful that I can right now. And hey, how about this? How about I dedicate this episode to everyone, everywhere, who doesn't have the time to do things like this or to think about things like this. So, hey, if you're new to all of this, this is episode 41 of a podcast that I make private at the independent video level, but that you can find in the entire body of work, which I've been reading now for, I don't know, maybe close to 2 years. I'm not really sure, but for a long time. And the book that I'm reading is On the Path, an anthology on the Noble Eightfold Path, drawn from the Pāli Canon. And this book was written by Ṭhānissaro Bhikkhu back in 2017. And Ṭhānissaro Bhikkhu, or Ajaan Geoff, which would be his, not monk name, I guess. He is a very well-known and well-respected American Buddhist monk of the Theravāda tradition, and he's well-known and deeply rooted in that tradition, and he's well-known for his translations of the canon. And this is an example, this book. You can get access to that, or you can just listen. I'm reading this book verbatim, and then I have commentary. And as I've said in the past, I am not a scholar. I've never been ordained. I am a Western white chick who's been following the Buddhist path to the best of my ability for a very long time. I have struggled with addiction for a very long time. So you'll hear about addiction a lot in this podcast. Yeah, if that's not your jam, the good news is there's about 2 gazillion YouTube channels out there. So, yay, you. All right, let's do it. The bottom of page 214, Sutta 122. Whether or not there is the arising of Tathagatas, and again, I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing this correctly. Whether or not there is the arising of Tathagatas, this property stands. This steadfastness of the Dhamma, this orderliness of the Dhamma. Whether or not there is the arising of Tathagatas, this property stands. The steadfastness of the Dhamma, this orderliness of the Dhamma. All fabrications are inconstant. The Tathagata directly awakens to that, breaks through to that. Directly awakening and breaking through to that. He declares it, teaches it, describes it, sets it forth. He reveals it, explains it, makes it plain. All fabrications are inconstant. And that comes from AN 3:137. Per the usual, and again, I forgot to mention this right off the bat, that yes, I do use AI. I use several, actually. Not several. That implies more than 2. I use 2. And then I kind of, weigh them against the canon. I don't read Pāli. I can't speak Pāli, but I run it all through different sources that I respect to help me out with interpreting these ancient and also what were, oral, really, ideas to make sure that I'm not misleading you, but maybe I am still, because it's AI, right? And everybody's got different views on AI. So as I said in the last episode, I really, really, really hope that you will, line this up against, trusted sources as well. Notice that I say trusted, discern, make mindfulness is not Buddhism. So be careful about where those come from, and whether or not that matters to you, whether or not you are interested in, early teachings or, again, everybody's different here, but just, be discerning. about where you're getting your information from. How about that? So before I do that, though, I want to read this little section here because before he gets into Sutta 123, he actually has a note section for the above. I guess we'll find out in a minute if it was just, for Sutta 122 or all that's become before Sutta 123. But yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and read that to you, and then I'll take all that information, apply a little, apply my prompts, etc., my system to it, and then I'll come back and do my best. But let me read this first. So note number 1. The suttas are inconsistent on the question of whether unbinding counts as a phenomena or Dhamma. ITI 90, Sutta 11, and I promise when I come back I'll find out what those are because, yeah, I don't remember. And a lot of it I never knew. So IT 90, Sutta 11, among others, states clearly that it is. AN 10:58, Sutta 353. However, calls unbinding the ending of all phenomena. SN 5:6, Sutta 351, quotes the Buddha as calling the attainment of the goal the transcending of all phenomena, just as SN 4:6 and SN 4:10 state that the Arahant has transcended dispassion, said to be the highest phenomenon. If the former definition applies here, unbinding would be not self. If the latter, the word phenomenon, as more inclusive than fabrication, would apply to the non-returner's experience of the deathless. See AN 9:36, Sutta 312. The Arahant's experience of unbinding would be neither self nor not self, as it lies beyond all designations. See DN 15, Sutta 348. Even the Arahant, at that point, would be undefined, as beings are defined by their attachments, whereas there are no attachments. Hello there. I hope you're doing well. Trying to get back in the habit of doing this once a week while I'm able. Still on that crazy job market. But I figure, hey, right now while I'm looking for right livelihood, I can do this. And I'm so grateful that I can right now. And hey, how about this? How about I dedicate this episode to everyone, everywhere, who doesn't have the time to do things like this or to think about things like this. So hey, if you're new to all of this, yeah, this is episode 41 of a podcast that I make private at the independent video level, but that you can find in the entire body of work, which I've been reading now for, I don't know, maybe close to 2 years. I'm not really sure, but for a long time. And the book that I'm reading is On the Path, an anthology on the Noble Eightfold Path, drawn from the Pāli Canon. And this book was written by Ṭhānissaro Bhikkhu back in 2017. And Ṭhānissaro Bhikkhu, or Ajaan Geoff, which would be his, not monk name, I guess. He is a very well-known and well-respected American Buddhist monk of the Theravāda tradition. And he's well-known and deeply rooted in that tradition. And he's well-known for his translations of the canon. And this is an example, this book. You can get access to that. Or you can just listen. I'm reading this book verbatim, and then I have commentary. And as I've said in the past, I am not a scholar. I've never been ordained. I am a Western white chick who's been following the Buddhist path to the best of my ability for a very long time. I have struggled with addiction for a very long time, so you'll hear about addiction a lot in this podcast. Yeah, if that's not your jam, the good news is there's about 2 gazillion YouTube channels out there. So, yay, you. All right, let's do it. The bottom of page 214, Sutta 122. Whether or not there is the arising of Tathagatas, and again, I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing this correctly. Whether or not there is the arising of Tathagatas, this property stands. This steadfastness of the Dhamma, this orderliness of the Dhamma, whether or not there is the arising of Tathāgatas, this property stands. The steadfastness of the Dhamma, this orderliness of the Dhamma. All fabrications are inconstant. The Tathāgata directly awakens to that, breaks through to that. Directly awakening and breaking through to that. He declares it, teaches it, describes it, sets it forth. He reveals it, explains it, makes it plain. All fabrications are inconstant. And that comes from AN 3:137. Per the usual, and again, I forgot to mention this right off the bat, that yes, I do use AI. I use several, actually. Not several. That implies more than two. I use two. And then I kind of, weigh them against the canon. I don't read Pāli. I can't speak Pāli, but I mean, I run it all through different sources that I respect to help me out with interpreting these ancient and also what were, oral, really, ideas, to make sure that I'm not misleading you, but maybe I am still, because it's AI, right? And everybody's got different views on AI. So as I said in the last episode, yeah, I really, really, really hope that you will, line this up against, trusted sources as well. Notice that I say trusted, discern, make mindfulness is not Buddhism. So be careful about where those come from, and whether or not that matters to you, whether or not you are interested in, early teachings or, again, everybody's different here, but just, be discerning about where you're getting your information from. How about that? So before I do that, though, I want to read this little section here, because before he gets into Sutta 123, he actually has a note section for the above. I guess we'll find out in a minute if it was just, for Sutta 122 or all that's become before Sutta 123. But yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and read that to you, and then I'll take all that information, apply a little, apply my prompts, etc., my system to it, and then I'll come back and do my best. But let me read this first. So note number 1. The suttas are inconsistent on the question of whether unbinding counts as a phenomena or Dhamma. ITI 90 Sutta 11, and I promise when I come back I'll find out what those are, because yeah, I don't remember. And a lot of it I never knew. So IT 90 Sutta 11, among others, states clearly that it is. AN 10:58, Sutta 353. However, calls unbinding the ending of all phenomena. SN 5:6, Sutta 351, quotes the Buddha as calling the attainment of the goal the transcending of all phenomena, just as SN 4:6 and SN 4:10 state that the Arahant has transcended dispassion, said to be the highest phenomenon. If the former definition applies here, unbinding would be not self. If the latter, the word phenomenon, as more inclusive than fabrication, would apply to the non-returner's experience of the deathless. See AN 9:36, Sutta 312. The Arahant's experience of unbinding would be neither self nor not self, as it lies beyond all designations. See DN 15, Sutta 348. Even the Arahant, at that point, would be undefined, as beings are defined by their attachments, whereas there are no attachments by which an Arahant could be defined as existing, not existing, both, or neither. See SN 23:2, Sutta 111, and SN 22:85 to 86. Whoa. So, yeah, I'll be right back to do my best with the help of a little robot action and trusted sources to try to unpack all of that for us. Be right back. Okay, so I figured I would start with the sutta itself and what Robot had to say about it, and then I'll kind of attack those notes there and tease out some of the sutta dropping that was happening, because I'm very ignorant of the suttas and the sutta names myself. And so I'll do a little research to make sure I, hopefully get it right and I can share it with you. So Sutta 122, spending a lot of time really focusing on the idea of kind of this, it's very poetic, isn't it? He ends each stanza with, all fabrications are inconstant. All fabrications are stressful. All phenomena are not self. So there's this, if you've ever studied poetry, there's this kind, and again, I did many years ago in college, and I used to write a lot of it, but I don't remember any of the kinds of, there's different kinds of poems you can write, and really what constitutes the genre, I guess, if you will, is, the nature of the writing, maybe, how long a line is, or how it repeats, or if it does repeat. Anyway, I always think of that. And I know Zen is, really fascinated with poetry as well. And I totally get it. It totally makes sense. It kind of, in a way, it reflects the way our mind works. As odd as this sounds, perhaps coming from a woman, there's a really nasty old alcoholic named Charles Bukowski, who I happen to think is a brilliant writer and who helped me so much in my young female adulthood. It's a real kind of, I know that sounds bizarre, but he helped me to soften around my relationship to men in many ways. But one of the things, you're probably wondering, what in the hell does this have to do with it? One of the things that was so effective about him for me, again, we all have to find what speaks to us, right? I mean, this is the beauty of, we're not all the same. Everything's fabricated or intersectional, whatever, works for you. It's the same idea. Is that he really just wrote from the gut. There was no softening. There was no placating. There was no nuancing. It was just this hard, sad, bitter, yearning, violent longing. And boy, did I recognize it. And the truth is that I think if a lot of us are profoundly honest with ourselves, and addicts find this out for themselves because, addiction is so painful, especially when it's to something that just devours your life. If you study anything about, addiction and how it manifests itself, how it plays itself out in the psyche, depending on the kind of, drug, one can become dependent upon it. And when one becomes that enslaved to an inanimate object like heroin, cake, whiskey, marijuana, porn, iPhone, it's on a spectrum, right? But if you don't seem to have any ability to control or regulate your interaction with that, then I would suggest to you that you probably are struggling with addiction. That's right, I said it. You don't have to like it, change the channel. I say that a lot on the podcast, by the way, if you're new to this podcast, I like to kind of be Mara a little bit. It's kind of my approach. In other words, I try to provoke. I provoke myself as well. I made a video about meditation. I talk about how I use my pain, and I actually make it hurt more so that I can sit. And I'm not saying you should do that, but what I'm saying is that I am very harsh and I'm very direct, and it is my technique. So it's not, necessarily going to be for everybody, but getting back to this sutta here, this repetition of a single short sentence at the end of each stanza is pointing back. It's just a fact, everything changes. Everything changes. Everything changes. Buddha doesn't say everything changes, so we should just go with the flow. That's a different religion, not Buddhism. Yeah. They get conflated, I know. They get conflated quite a bit. But that's something else. That might be Taoism. I'm not sure. I don't know enough about that. But that's not Buddhism, just kind of going with the flow because everything is impermanent. That's not quite accurate from my understanding of old-timey Buddhist thought, psychology, philosophy. We simply understand that impermanence is a fact of life. It doesn't mean that we don't engage with life or that we don't care or that we don't discern. It doesn't mean that we flatten everything out to be the same because things are impermanent. Not all things are the same. You know, to my view, for people who say they don't believe anything, there's so many psychological tests that you could take to prove yourself wrong. I mean, I guess you could lie to yourself once you looked at the responses. You could be like, nah, all right, yeah, whatever. I mean, I guess you could do that, sure. I mean, there's plenty of people that just don't believe psychology is a real thing. Right on. It's all phenomena arising. But you really could take a battery, really, of tests that would tell you a lot, and it would actually kind of corroborate with other people's perception of you. So it's not like it's just right. It's actually like it could play out. So you do believe in something. Your choices are coming from that belief. Your relationships are born out of that belief. You do believe in something, whether you know it or not. And you probably also believe that you're right, because we have to, right? We have to believe we're right. What if you didn't, though? But what if you did? You know, it's this crazy discernment. So impermanence is a fact of life, and we can be discerning. Stress, dissatisfaction, unhappiness, right? All of that. It just comes with the territory, you know, and we can be discerning. So I do not mean this to be flippant. This sentiment is not excusing the bystander effect. Understand me. In Buddhism, no, it's not all morally relevant, and it's not to be flattened. There is an eightfold path. It is an ethical path that we have decided to work with. There is a frame. It is not flat. It should not be flattened, I would argue. And this to me is just the huge paradox, you know, that again, we've already been working with in these last few episodes. You know, we're still in right view, man. You know, and I, you know, I feel quite certain that that's why right view is often presented as it is in this book first, you know, because I don't really know that you could really kind of sign off on or kind of determine that you're going to contemplate in any real meaningful way the other 7 if you can't really come to terms with this one, right view. And right view doesn't mean like it is the right only way to be in the world. Right view means this is the right view if you're following Buddhism. You know, this is just like Christians have their you know, and this is hard. If you're living in Judeo-Christian soup, then you're so convinced that you're right that you're going to create all kinds of stories about people like me to help you to double down on your rightness, because the alternative would break your brain, right? There can't be any room for in your narrative for someone like a Buddhist. It's not possible. So I get that this can be, or that's how it can feel, right? I mean, I can't tell you how many people that I've spoken to who've, you know, thought that, yeah, quote unquote, Buddhism is really cool. And then when they find out what we actually believe, they just can't square it. They just can't get behind it. They can't be okay with it. They have to pathologize it. They have to pathologize me. And yet, it's certainly a lot older than Christianity, certainly a lot less violent than Christianity. And I would argue it's certainly a lot more compassionate than Christianity. At least the original. Anyway, so yeah, that to me is kind of what I'm seeing there, and what Robot is also kind of, you know. I mean, I can just read you what Robot says if you'd like. Here you go. The Buddha is saying, Robot says, impermanence is a fact of life. Everything that made or put together, thoughts, feelings, bodies, societies, even stars, the beloved AI, eventually changes and falls apart. Not everybody wants to look at their mind in that way. Not everybody wants to kind of sit with what arises when you do meditate. And again, there's a certain way that we meditate in Buddhism, several different ways, but one, right concentration, which is kind of like I've been taught an entry point. And once you do that, long enough, and you really kind of get to see the fruits of that, and you really kind of start to see for yourself the nature of your own mind, then this just becomes inordinately true, that you don't need a Buddha, you don't need a teacher, you don't need anyone around really to tell you this. It's just obvious. It's just obvious, because you've started paying attention. I would argue but not just me. So I'm gonna go check out some of these little bits here on notes to find out. Yeah, let's take a look at this note here and find out what some of these the names of these suttas are that Ṭhānissaro Bhikkhu is quoting. I'll be right back. So I thought I would start off by maybe just spouting off the names of the suttas that Ṭhānissaro Bhikkhu referenced here. And so ITI, Itivutaka. Very cool, very cool. AN, Anguttara Nikaya, Book of Tens, Sutta 58. So this is one of the many ways that I love to play with AI, and kind of be in dialogue with this kind of thing that we've created. Whoa! But, it just keeps making my reading list longer and longer and longer. It's like, and some of these, names I remember, in some dusty old corner of my brain, that rings a bell right there, the Book of Tens. SN is the Sutta Nipata. And then, gets into even more detail where, like, for instance, it's giving the example of SN 5:6, Sutta 351. And Robot here says that would be Sutta Nipata, chapter 5, Pariyanavaga, Sutta 6. So again, just keep on adding to that reading list, right? So yeah, I thought I would just share some of that with you. And oh, did I already say DN? I don't think I did. So DN, Digha Nikaya. I hope I'm saying this right. So yeah, I think that covers all of these little abbreviations that we've been talking about in this episode and previous. And now I can get to what the notes were referring to, which is, I realize it was kind of inherent there, but still, I like to dig, as I mentioned, I'm a digger. What do you want? I'm a digger. Yeah, basically, Ṭhānissaro Bhikkhu is just saying, hey, there's not just one voice here. Not everybody is in agreement. Again, more than 2,600-year-old religion / philosophy / psychology. Ancient, been taken up by other cultures, changed, incorporated into, pre-existing religious beliefs to kind of create some other derivative of it. So, a lot's happened to it. It's like the game of telephone, right? So here he's saying, different texts classify these ideas a little bit differently. So it's not an absolute, there's different interpretations, there's different approaches, we weren't there. Nobody was there. So, scholars do their best, and obviously the further on down you get, the more potential there is for veering it off from its original, and this is all stuff that we know, right? What does the Bible have, like 40 authors or something like that? At a certain point, you kind of have to go, who knows what the Word of God is at this point, right? 40 authors, right? Some of which had incredibly high political control, had political power. So, it's complicated. So let me see how I do on this. The Itivutaka 90, not sure how I did, but in that one, right? ITI 90, it suggested that nibbana is phenomena arising. So the idea of unbinding, the release, I don't know, I'm not really quite sure what word to use right here, but for lack of like being able to get to it right now, I'm just gonna go to like psychological terms because it's kind of helping me. Unbinding, right? So that kind of ability to differentiate between what is actually happening and the story that we tell ourselves about what is happening. There's a difference there. There's a distinction there. That distinction, that difference, that space is unbinding. So ITI 90 says that phenomena, that experience is phenomena. It's a phenomenon. It's a phenomenon that happens. It's a thing that happens. It's just this thing that happens. It arises. So it's not conditioned. It's timeless. It's an unconditioned phenomena. And then he's saying, but other suttas say that unbinding, nibbana, is the ending of all phenomena. So there's a difference there, right? It's that when you experience that unbinding, there is an ending of all phenomena. In other words, it's not some thing that could arise in our awareness or consciousness, right? It's not a thing that arises, a phenomena, right? So other suttas are saying, no, it's not that. It's actually the ending of all of that. That's what unbinding is. And then Bhikkhu here is saying, and yet still other verses are saying that it's transcending both of those. Like, oh, this is where it's just like, this is just too much, right? It makes your eyes bleed. It's like, what, right? Here Bhikkhu says, and I mean, how can anyone ever know? And even if you've had experiences like my own, right? Experiences that you can't maybe necessarily explain, that, like, again, I talk quite openly here about, my kind of religious, or, my relationship to, a God or a not God, if you're an atheist, whatever, it's complicated, right? But I have had experiences that have blown my mind, and it's not lost on me, as I talked about in the last episode. And here, Bhikkhu's saying the full arahant, in other words, somebody who has, in Buddhism, and again, this is where it's not just Buddhism who kind of holds this idea. I bet you it's in cultures everywhere. I don't know. I only know what I know, which is really very little. Is that if you're fully awake, air quotes, then it can't be put into words. So there you go. That's what he's saying in the notes section. And again, what AI is kind of synthesizing for me out of what Bhikkhu wrote here is, and I'll just read it for you verbatim because I think it really kind of, I would agree from what I have learned that what AI is interpreting from Bhikkhu here is this: since the arahant clings, here, let me back it up. Here's the whole blurb here. For the arahant, and then in parentheses, Robot says the fully awakened one, which is what arahant, is, again, we're talking about Buddhism, right? This is all the language of Buddhism. And perhaps the Vedas, I don't know enough about the Vedas. Their experience of unbinding is beyond definition. I have had moments of unbinding that are absolutely beyond definition. Talked about that in the last episode and other episodes. Doesn't make me special. I'm not special. I mean, what I mean by that is, I don't know much about Judeo-Christianity, but, of course, because I live in the soup, I definitely hear things, and I'm well acquainted with the idea of he who seeks, find. In my case, she who seeks, finds. And that's, the Buddha would agree. Not that you Christians care about what the Buddha thinks, right? In other words, I'm not special because I've had these experiences. I saw it. Boom, that's it. If you seek, you'll find it too. But you really got to seek. You got to stick with it. It's not like it just happened, like poof. You really got to stick it out, man. You got to stick it out. But at any rate, and then a Robot goes on to say, beings are normally defined by what they cling to. Yeah. That's what gives them an identity. That's what gives us our egoic sense of the I, me, my. That we build up a whole story around that. And, as Jung would point out, and others, so we'll call Jung American psychology, even though he wasn't, I think he was German or Swiss or something. I don't remember what he was. Sorry, Jung, if I offended you. May you rest in peace. You gave us great thoughts. But he wasn't a big fan of Buddhism, as I've mentioned before. We can become trapped, by the identity that we cling to, and that is how we become defined, identified, and it can become a trap. It can become a vice. It can become not a vice like sinner, vice like no dude, a fucking vice. Like, have you ever seen a vice? You can kind of unscrew it, you could put something in it and you tighten it back up, and that shit's in there. It's not going anywhere. It's a trap. It's a trap. It's a trap. That's what I mean by vice. Your sense of self can be a trap. So you have to be careful that if you're going to play around with storytelling and archetype and all of that jazz, and I'm just giving you the Buddhist warning, not Sarah's warning. I am just, transmitting. And you can fact check me. You know, it's not like, just go read it for yourself what it was taught. You need to be very, very careful, you know, that you don't become addicted to your identity. You don't begin to cling to your identity so that it crowds out everything else. It's dangerous, dangerous territory. In Buddhism, we just don't recommend it. Robot says, since the Arahant clings to nothing, you can't define them as existing, not existing, both or neither. And I want to stop soon because I want to continue the reading. But yeah, you know, this has come up in the podcast, or not in the podcast. I mean, it's come up in the book, you know, and then I've also commented on it in previous episodes. This idea of, you know, what does it really mean to be nothing, to be impermanent, to be no self? What does that mean in Buddhism? Not another. What did Buddha mean by that? What did early Buddhist text mean? What are they talking about there when they say no self? So anyway, I'm gonna keep on going and get back into the suttas. Fact check me. So let's keep going. Sutta 123. Form, monks, is not self. If form were the self, this form would not lend itself to disease. It would be possible to say, with regard to form, let my form be thus. Let my form not be thus. But precisely because form is not self, this form lends itself to disease. And it is not possible to say, with regard to form, let my form be thus. Let my form not be thus. Feeling is not self. Perception is not self. Fabrication is not self. Consciousness is not self. If consciousness were the self, this consciousness would not lend itself to disease. It would be possible to say, with regard to consciousness, let my consciousness be thus. Let my consciousness not be thus. But precisely because consciousness is not self, consciousness lends itself to disease. And it is not possible to say, with regard to consciousness, let my consciousness be thus. Let my consciousness not be thus. What do you think, monks? Is form constant or inconstant? Inconstant, Lord. And is that which is inconstant easeful or stressful? Stressful, Lord. And is it fitting to regard what is inconstant stressful, subject to change as, this is mine, this is myself, this is what I am? No, Lord. And then he's got, so this, I think he's just articulating that, you know, once again, there's repetition here in the stanza. So he's got an ellipses, and then he's just saying, in other words, this again, but in relationship to, is feeling constant or inconstant? Inconstant, Lord. And then again for, is perception constant or inconstant? Inconstant, Lord. And then, are fabrications constant or inconstant? Inconstant, Lord. What do you think, monks? Is consciousness constant or inconstant? Inconstant, Lord. Inconstant. Incontinent, Lord. That's cutting out. Maybe not. We'll see. We'll see what happens. We'll see how I feel when I'm actually editing this. Let me take that back. Are fabrications constant or inconstant? Inconstant, Lord. What do you think, monks? Is consciousness constant or inconstant? Inconstant, Lord. And is that which is inconstant easeful or stressful? Stressful, Lord. And is it fitting to regard what is inconstant, stressful, subject to change as, this is mine, this is myself, this is what I am? No, Lord. Thus, monks, any form whatsoever that is past, future, or present, internal or external, blatant or subtle, common or sublime, far or near, every form is to be seen with right discernment, as it has come to be. This is not mine. This is not myself. This is not what I am. Any feeling whatsoever, any perception whatsoever, any fabrications whatsoever, any consciousness whatsoever that is past, future, or present, internal or external, blatant or subtle, common or sublime, far or near. Every consciousness is to be seen with right discernment, as it has come to be. This is not mine. This is not myself. This is not what I am. Seeing thus, the well-instructed disciple of the noble ones grows disenchanted with form, disenchanted with feeling, disenchanted with perception, disenchanted with fabrications, disenchanted with consciousness. Disenchanted, he becomes dispassionate. Through dispassion, he is released. With release, there is the knowledge. Released, he discerns that birth is ended, the holy life fulfilled, the task done. There is nothing further for this world. And that comes from SN 22:59. So I am, definitely going to go check, but I already have a sense of what this means. I just don't want to speak until I feel a little bit more confident about it because it's been so long for me. And if this is a one-off for you, then you may not know this, but in earlier episodes, anytime I come against the more kind of cosmological aspects of Buddhism, which are its birthright. I mean, I realize secular Buddhists have a real issue with this, and that's why they're called secular Buddhists, because they're rejecting the satorical aspects, or however you say that word of Buddhism. I don't particularly hold that view. I don't reject anything in Buddhism because it's not mine to reject. It came to us from another culture, another place. And I've also, as I said, I've had all kinds of crazy experiences that I can't explain. And so I just reserve the right to not know. So when I get to passages like this, okay, if you say so, man. I'm going to go check in with AI to make sure that I understand what this passage means, and then I'll be back to talk about it. So stand by. Okay, so I'm back. And yeah, it indeed, is a continuation of the sentiments that we've been exploring for the past several episodes. This really, really rich chapter on right view. There's very few people who listen to this, but it's out there in the world now. And if you're in the West, I live in the United States, and this is very much culturally a Christian place. And so the ideas that I'm presenting are definitely most assuredly foreign to you. And, as I've mentioned, I've had plenty of Christians try to convert me fearing for my soul. And I appreciate that. We're not playing the same game. They wouldn't call it a game. So I don't mean to be, divisive. It's just that, again, this is just a very different worldview, but anybody who, I assume that for the most part, that's coming from a well-intentioned place. Not everybody's coming from a well-intentioned place in that regard, but, usually the people that in the past have tried to change my mind, it's because they love me, and they care about me, and they believe in the Christian story. And to me, it's a story, but it's not, I have to assume that it's not a story to Christians, because lest they wouldn't look so alarmed. That I don't believe in what they believe. So I have to assume that, they really do fear for my soul. And who knows, maybe I'll die and find out that they're right. And I guess the last laugh will be on God. I don't know, but we are doing something different. My hope as we move forward in the world is just that there can be more and more space for people to hold a different view than the one that, that I hold, that you hold. I doubt we're going to progress, quote unquote, the way we fancy we progress until we can really do that, because there's really nowhere else to go from there other than force, authoritarianism, totalitarianism, suppression, oppression. Yeah. So if you can't make space for someone to hold a different view than yours, there's really only violence to be got at from there. Think about the alternative. If you really need to be right and you can't convince someone else that you're right, but you really need to be right for you to hang on to your sense of my, me, I, then yeah, you've officially become dangerous to others who don't agree with you. It just kind of stands to reason. I don't know. You call it Buddhism, I call it logical. Anyway, once again, I'm going way off the rails, but coming back to this, the Buddha rejected eternal life. I reject eternal life. And maybe there is eternal life, maybe, I don't know. But Buddhism makes more sense to me than the story of Christianity because of my personal experience. So just loving the idea for me, myself, personally, that humans can hold space. They can make space for more than a dualistic kind of positioning. Or I guess in the sense of, Christianity, kind of a monotheist kind of way of looking at reality. And, I've gotten into many, many interesting conversations, for instance, maybe people who are more Hindu in nature, who just, why can't you just, consider the possibility that the thing that you're calling phenomena, is that when you're having those experiences that you say you've experienced, Sarah, why can't you just acknowledge that that's God? But, you can have that kind of circular argument forever. I mean, I could easily come back with, and why must you need to believe that there is a God? What is in you that so desperately clings to this need to have this, there's nowhere to solve that. You can't solve that if the two people having the conversation are not operating from the same operating system. The most that one can hope for is that whatever you believe in, your story that you're buying into, whether it be Islam, Judaism, Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, Taoism, all of the other isms. Now there's like new tech bro isms that revolve around AI, Stoicism, whatever, or maybe nothingism. Maybe you're just an atheist, which, let's face it, as we discussed earlier, you believe in stuff, whether you know it or not. I think the most that at least I can hope for is that, we can just make a little room for each other's, frame, rather than trying to massage and manage them to be what you need them to be. Why? First of all, why do you need me to be a Christian? Why? So you can feel better. Why do you need to feel better? I'm Buddhist, right? Why do you need to feel better? Why do you need to feel happy? Why do you need to be happy? Why are you clinging to being happy? Why are you clinging? See, so you just can't we're not having the same conversation. It doesn't mean we need to be enemies. I think we're kind of in this weird place right now, in the world, where for some reason people seem to think that a different worldview means other, danger, devour, conquer. That's how children solve their problems, not adults. To my view, conversation, if you're really confident in your faith, then you don't need to try to bend me to your will. If you really believe in all the stuff you claim to believe, regardless of what you're claiming to believe in or not believe in, then why do you need me to be different for you? You just undermined your own argument from where I'm standing. Anyway, I'm going to get on to it. So yeah. What's being said here in this sutta is whatever you're experiencing, all of it. This body, your feelings, your perceptions, your beliefs, the ones you claim you don't have if you're an atheist. You may not believe in God, but you believe in science. You believe it. You believe in your need to be right. That's a belief, right? I mean, really, it's turtles all the way down, dude. You believe in something. Your habits of mind, your sense of your sense of who you think you are, all of that. If you really look at them honestly, again, Buddhism is a practice. If you really look at them honestly, in other words, if you sit in meditation for a long fucking time and you look at them honestly, then you start to notice something. They show up, they change, and they fade. They don't stay. They don't stay around. Any of it. Not the blissed out, God's communicating to me directly and I can feel it in my body, and not the, I'm a piece of shit and don't deserve to be here. None of that stays. All of that is thought in your fucking head, period. And how convincing it is determined upon how much you buy into it, how you believe it, how long you've been conditioned by it, how long that operating system has been working in your life, how long people have been telling you those stories about who they think you are or who you should be. That's all that it is in Buddhism. You can't control them. You can't claim them. They're not yours. You can watch them. You can be with them, sit next to them, sit in them, but they're not yours. And when someone really kind of sees this for themselves, something shifts, kind of start to lose your enchantment with chasing after external things in the hopes that, eureka, there it is. There what is what? I think, people hear words in Buddhism like disenchantment. And again, even in the sutta here, right? You become disenchanted. You become dispassionate. I mean, it really does make us sound like a tremendous bummer, doesn't it? Yeah. I mean, it makes sense to me because when you think of the Christian and Catholic story, I mean, there's a lot of horror and terror, but there's also a lot of joy. It's a story, it's got an arcing story. It's kind of, it's quite different from Buddhism. The only story you're going to get in Buddhism is, what we know about the guy's life before he left his family and his kid behind, to go awaken himself. That lack of story can just sound awful, but I would argue from where I'm standing that it only feels awful if you're attached to it. And I think that this is another word, I think, in Buddhism that the West gets really wrong. They really just don't. And I realize I'm in the West. I get it. I really do. But, I am saying that I recognize the difference between what is taught on the page of old-timey Buddhism and what I've seen kind of regurgitated in the Western Buddhism kind of version of Buddhism, and they don't really correlate so often. And I think that this word right here is one of those really big words that people in the West just don't get about Buddhism. They just cannot wrap their mind around it for whatever reason, is this idea of attachment. And I think that the misunderstanding is there's this strange kind of correlation that I think people draw. Not all people, but just my experience of people. Again, you all know where I live. You all know everything about me if you listen to fucking manga. Then for some reason, people just really value attachment a lot. They just put a lot of value on it. And I'm also a psychologist, as you know. And so, from a psychological frame, just like tribalism, attachment can suck. Attachment can destroy your marriage. Maybe you're too attached, and that can come out in all kinds of really dysfunctional ways that drive away your partner. Or maybe you struggle with attachment, you're avoidant, and you drive away your partner because they feel unattended to, unloved, unseen, unheard. So our fascination with attachment, I would say, is really kind of psychologically wrecking us. I think all of us could use a little, we've had a good long dose of Christian values injected in us, and I think all of us could really stand maybe get just a small micro dose, okay, of Buddhism. And I'm going to guess, I'm going out on a limb here on where Buddha came up in, also in Hinduism. I'm guessing it's probably the same kind of, foundation of just relinquishing this need to be attached to the me, the my, the mine, the my wife, my husband, my child, my genes, my family, my legacy, my art, my gifts, my story, my truth. It really does a number on you, and it's a little narcissistic, quite frankly. There's a big, wide world out there. And I mean, unless you're living in Palestine right now, or places like it, then you really don't have a whole lot to bitch about from where I'm standing. I know I certainly don't have anything to bitch about. So once again, when you do start to see that, it really does feel like a release and a relief. And I would say that, the tail end of the sutta here, where it starts to get into the cosmological and very different end games, right? For Buddhist, if you were to compare and put it into a side-by-side with Buddhism, and I don't know enough about Islam, but, a side-by-side between Buddhism and like maybe Judaism, and I guess I don't know enough about Judaism either, but Christianity or Catholicism, that I can speak to some. There's a very, very, very different kind of idea of what the end game is. One where, man is special in some way and, keeps on doing what they're doing. And the other one doesn't really need to play this dance anymore. And to my mind, neither one of those need to be awful stories, which is why neither one of those stories necessarily needs to be threatening to you or me. I've kind of been forced to kind of, be with Christians and Catholics my whole life because of where I live, so if I can do it, you can do it, right? I mean, if I can make room and get along and have family members and love them and be with them, even when they try to passively aggressively convert me, you can hold a little space for the Buddhists in your life, surely, right? You can do a little growing. Yeah. Well, I'm going to keep on going here. So we're going to keep on reading, but yes, there you go. So that last sutta might be a sobering one for those of you who don't like that idea very much, and that's cool. Yeah, no problem. Okay, let's keep going. Sutta 124. On one occasion, the Blessed One was staying among the Ayujans, hope I said that right, Ayujans, on the banks of the Ganges River. There he addressed the monks,